Hello everyone, it's Danny Hay here once again for the SLA Europe podcast at the online information conference in London. Right now I'm joined by Jemima Gibbons, who is the social media strategist at All About Brands. Welcome, Jemima.
Hi, Danny.
So today you gave a talk about are you a social leader, and you had a good audience, good questions, and I'd really like to spend the next couple of minutes just briefing our audience about what you shared with us, because it wasn't really about tools, it was about behaviors and skills, and I think that's a wonderful new take on this subject. So let's start off with, what's your definition of a social leader?
Okay, well, a social leader is really someone who gets the kind of social ethos right. They really understand what it is that people need, how to get the best people. They are very self-aware. They are aware of their actions, and they also have a degree of emotional control. So they don't just scream and shout at people. They actually know how to get the best out of people. That's a true social leader, I think.
Okay, and you also mentioned emotional intelligence in your talk. What does that have to do with being a social leader?
Well, obviously Daniel Goleman came out with the idea of emotional intelligence back in 1995 and published a best-selling book on the subject. And I really like the idea of emotional intelligence because I think, as Daniel Goleman said, it's as important as IQ, if not more important, in top business leaders. And it's again sort of looking back at those qualities of self-awareness, self-control, empathy with other people, the ability to communicate very well. You have to be an excellent communicator. I mean, in his book he lists all the qualities, but it's really again about self-awareness and self-control.
And is that a change from previous styles of leadership?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. In the talk, I refer back to this idea of servant leadership in the 1970s, and the idea of the leader as someone who looked to serve others, and that obviously was developed by Peter Senge with his idea of the learning organisation, and then later in the 90s, Eric de Geus at Shell and his idea of the living organisation, and they were talking about the leader as a steward, as somebody who would take the company take control of the company and then look after the company and nurture it and actually develop it so that when he passed it on to his or her successor, the company would be in a better state. And then, of course, in the noughties, we had people like Jim Collins and Good to Great talking about level 5 leadership, which is this idea of you have power and authority, but you also have humility. So again, it goes back to this idea of self-awareness and emotional control.
Okay, and then the next thing you talked about was the types of social leaders. You distinguished 3 types of social leaders, and I'm just going to mention them. So there was the social leader, the anti-social leader, and the sociopath. Can you just briefly, enlighten us? What do you mean by these 3 types?
Okay, well, yes, obviously, only the first leader, the social leader, is of course a social leader. The other 2 are not social leaders, I think the sort of what I wanted to say there really was the social leader can be a bit of an ideal, but I think it's something we should all aspire to. I mean, I gave the example of Barack Obama, in his leadership, his presidential leadership campaign in the United States. He was very much a social leader. He was really sort of tapping into grassroots support. And of course, since he's become president, he's maybe shown qualities that are not so sort of typically a true social leader. But I think for many of us, the social leader is somebody we might be at one point in time. I think very few of us are going to be that 100% of the time. But I've gone into what those qualities are again, but it's all about nurturing others, about empowering others, about being community-led rather than being selfish. Whereas the anti-social leader is actually someone who a lot of us probably are more like on a day-to-day basis. It's somebody who maybe has good intentions, but is actually quite sort of ego-led and often acts quite selfishly, which I think most of us find in our everyday actions. We may behave in a selfish way even though we don't intend to. And the anti-social leader is also someone who maybe just only empowers his or her favourites. So they won't empower everybody, they'll just empower the people that they want to help. And also somebody who maybe doesn't always communicate very well because they're often too busy or too distracted or too tired, whatever, to really tell you exactly what it is they expect of you. So I think the anti-social leader is a figure we quite typically see in business. And then, of course, the final category was a sociopath. Who obviously seems like an extreme character, and in the talk I used Vincent Vega from Pulp Fiction, the John Travolta character. So he's clearly somebody who is kind of pretty much incapable of sort of positive human emotions. Clearly is quite destructive, quite ruthless, entirely kind of ego-driven and ego-led. And of course the reality is, while we may not have actual psychopaths in business leadership roles today,
the characteristics,
yeah, we certainly do have some sociopaths, people who really are very, very, very ego-driven and don't operate in the best interests of the stakeholder community at large. So yeah, that's the kind of final category.
Okay, and do you see these social leaders emerging more now, because the antisocial leaders and also the sociopaths tend to be the ones that have risen to the top in the last decades, because that was the sort of behavior that was expected and rewarded, and now this social leader who is a very different type, do you see that being coming to the top much more?
Well, that's a good question. I hope so. I hope so. I mean, I've only really been studying this area myself for maybe the last 3 years, so that's when I've really been looking out for people who might embody these qualities. But I think certainly as we see the rise of social technologies, social tools, social networks, this type of leadership is something that we are going to see succeeding, because one point I made in the talk is this kind of panopticon effect of social media. So there's kind of nowhere to hide now if you are behaving in an unethical way. Eventually, you sooner or later you will be found out, and we saw that with the News of the World and News International in the UK, that they hacked phones from celebrities and members of the public, and that it was uncovered 2 years ago, and they clearly thought, well, this is all going to go away, but then it came back to haunt them, and I think more and more we're going to see that big businesses who flout the rules will get caught doing that, and so I think in that environment, hopefully, social leaders, sort of more self-aware, more humble, more community-led leaders will rise to the top, because they'll have the reputations to support them in what they do.
Yeah, and I think now it used to be that you had to be at a certain position in society or an organization to be a leader or be recognized as a leader, and now with social media, anyone at any level or any place can start leading a group and empowering others or bringing people together, so that really cuts down the all the hierarchies which were in place.
Well, and everyone has a platform. Yep. Everyone has a platform now, because in the past it would be very expensive to you'd have to be a business magnate to set up your own newspaper. Yep. Now, of course, you can just go on Facebook, and if your cause is right, you'll get the followers.
Yeah. And then you mentioned 6 rules for social leaders. We're not going to go through all of them, because that would take too much time, but just picking 2. So first you talked about empowering others. So you mentioned an example from someone at IBM. Could you summarize that?
And the sort of I interviewed a few people at IBM actually, and it's a pretty impressive company when it comes to social leadership, I think. I mean, and I think part of that is due to the fact that they had a real crisis of identity around 2000 when their share price plummeted, and they had to kind of reinvent themselves. And one of the key figures in this reinvention has been Gina Poole, who actually started out as an engineer there in the mid-1980s and has been there for nearly 30 years now. And she's a sort of true social leader in that she's just been quietly enabling others. She built up a network of what are known as the Blue IQ ambassadors, and these are champions within IBM's 500,000 strong workforce who go out and promote social tools and collaboration and encourage people to connect with each other. And Gina very firmly believes not only in empowering others, but also in building the value of building a network based on weak ties. So she sort of wants to connect the whole organisation, so that if people need to ask something of one of their colleagues, whether they're in another country or whatever, because they already have an informal relationship through social networks, then it's easier to ask them for other more important stuff as well, and it's easier for them as a nation to a company, not a nation, to collaborate and to help each other.
Yes, and I see very clear role for more people, building those networks and being, the hubs or the coordinators that hooking up people, hooking up communities. Go here, have you thought about asking this group, because it actually flattens the organization. So even a company like IBM, which is huge, with a platform like social media, you can probably connect anyone to anyone with a few few links. And one other thing that really struck me as an example that you, or a rule that you set for social is you have to have a service ethic, and you mentioned the example of Zappos. Could you summarize that?
Oh yeah, so Tony Say is the CEO of Zappos, and he when he took over as CEO of Zappos in 2000, he had this very strong vision of building a company based around customer service. Mm-hmm. That was going to be the absolute sort of foremost aim of this business. And so he built Zappos up, and they started out as an online shoe company. I mean, now they sell lots of shoes, clothing, etc. And in fact, they were bought by Amazon in 2009 for $1.2 billion dollars. So he clearly had a very good idea about what he was doing. But I've never met him. I would love to meet him. But he recently, Tony Say recently published his autobiography, which is called Delivering Happiness. And it's a really, even if you hate business books, I really recommend it, because it doesn't read like a business book at all. It's very honest, very open, and he sort of basically talks about his aim to just make the customers happy. Yep. and listen to what they wanted, and to give them what they wanted. And it sounds very simple, but very few businesses do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then if I had to go back to my manager tomorrow and tell him, I heard this wonderful talk about being a social leader, how would you pitch or convince him or her to be more of a social leader? What's in it for them?
Well, yes, I'm thinking about this in my with my colleagues at the moment, actually, because I think a lot of it's the whole thing about a lot of leaders should be the sort of true social leader, but then they often fall into the kind of like anti-social leader behaviour, not because they don't want to empower others, they don't want to enable others, but just because the day-to-day stresses of running a business, and we're all in the grips of recession right now, and it's very difficult to sort of say, hey, let's not worry about the targets, let's just take a break, sit down and have a creative brainstorm over some hot chocolate or something. But I think I think it's quite hard to broach this subject. Yeah. But I think if you do want to challenge anyone you work with on the idea of being a more social enterprise, a more social business in the sort of in the terms of connectivity and communication, I think maybe just start with taking someone out for coffee and just sort of having a non-confrontational sort of friendly chat, and really taking it from there. I mean, if you can't get them on that level, then maybe there's no hope for your relationship with them at that company. So that's how I would start out anyway. Yeah.
Okay, Jemima, on behalf of all our listeners, thank you very much for talking to me. And if people want to follow you online, do you also have a Twitter account that people should follow?
Yes, I'm at Jemima G, and that's Jemima with a J.
Okay, well, I hope you get a lot of new followers based on this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Denny. Thank you.